Well, good evening and welcome to our third Thurnauer talk. I'm Michael Reingel, the Associate Director of the Thurnauer School of Music. And on behalf of Dorothy Rothman, the founding director of the school, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thanking you for taking time on your Tuesday evening to learn with us, to have fun with us and be together. During this COVID times, there definitely have been some nice silver linings, and I think being together with things like this, especially for people who don't live in the area, to be able to participate with us is a wonderful bonus. I just want to say a few things before we sort of dive in. One is just how grateful we are that you could be with us. I think I mentioned that. The other is that we will be recording this, so afterwards, if there are people who would have liked to have watched this, let us know. We'll make it available to you. And this is our third talk, and we'll be having them monthly moving forward. So sort of keep your eye out and come and learn. They've all been wonderful so far, and I've no doubt that tonight's will be as well. So tonight we have a man who probably needs no introduction to this group, but I'm going to introduce him anyhow briefly. I feel very lucky to know Seth Himmelhoch. Seth is a terrific guitarist, a terrific teacher, and a great person. And in my 28 years at the school and Dorothy's 30 plus years since founding the school, he's really just a gem of a man, a mensch, as we say, and a pleasure to know. In terms of his own background, you're going to hear a lot more about that, of course, during this Thurnauer talk over the next hour plus. But I will say that Seth is a teacher at Thurnauer School of Music since approximately 1986. And he also teaches at William Patterson. He has the guitar program there. He teaches at Suzuki workshops around the country as well as in Australia. And he's also a Suzuki teacher trainer. So he teaches other teachers how to teach Suzuki guitar. He's a leader in the Suzuki guitar field. He's also a performer in his own right. He's a member of Duo Cavatina with flutist, Carol Shansky. He has degrees from Manhattan School of Music and also has studied other places as well, including for his Suzuki training. So he's also a composer. You might hear a little bit about that, and has had an interesting journey, musical journey, like most musicians have. And I think you'll enjoy hearing about Seth's musical journey, how he came into playing guitar, how he found his way to Thurnauer, how he found his way to teaching the Suzuki method, and sort of his reflections on all of that. There's quite a lot to talk about, probably more than we can really do justice in this amount of time, but let's savor the time that we have together, and there will definitely be time at the end for questions and answers. So save your questions, and please keep yourselves muted throughout the talk, and we will have a chance afterwards, like I said, to ask questions. Dan, for some reason, if you could make me co-host, that would be helpful. If you're still on, Dan, because I'm not able to spotlight at the moment. So Dan Jatowski, are you still with us on this? So Dorothy, could you do me a favor? Sorry, could you ask Dan to get on and make me co-host, because I had to do a different method so that I could get this to work well today. Okay. Oh, Dan is on, it says. So okay.
Just your host now.
Okay, great. Maybe he's since made me host. Great. Now I can spotlight Seth, and I will, for the short term, spotlight myself. But then I'm going to leave myself out of it as much as possible. Sorry, I'm going to add a spotlight. Thank you. I'm not new to this, but I'm not. Don't do it every day. So Seth, before we dive into the questions that we sort of talked about that we would talk about, I just want to ask you to check in with you. How are you doing during COVID? How have you managed during the past year plus? And what have been your experiences as a person and as a teacher during COVID?
Well, thank you, Michael. And first of all, let me just say thank you for that introduction. I don't feel worthy of my own introduction, so thank you so much. And it's kind of overwhelming when I hear it all explained that way. At any rate, the COVID situation has been very interesting and very engaging and very difficult in a lot of respects, in that we were just suddenly thrust into a whole situation where we had to figure out how to teach people online. At first I thought it was going to be impossible, but everybody said, the university and also Dorothy and you said, well, we're going to do it this way. It's going to be Zoom. So I got Zoom on my computer, and started figuring out the program, and the next thing you know, I was teaching on Zoom and figuring out ways to do things a little bit differently. One of the things about Zoom is that you have to be a little bit more unitary in your approach to a given point. So you had to, teach one thing at a time and really be very clear about it and hope for the best. You can't reach over and adjust somebody's hand, and you can't hear the subtlety of their tone, and there's so much that is unavailable to you that you have to use your imagination to get through it. So it's been an interesting journey trying to kind of stretch myself this way, and I'm just really thankful for Zoom because I still have a job. I'm still working after all this time. Not everybody has been so lucky. So thank you, Zoom, for existing.
That's true. Within the arts field, those involved in education have been more fortunate in terms of employment than those primarily focused on performance, as I think you're alluding to. Well, Seth, I'd like to just sort of, for now, start at the beginning. Tell us about your childhood in music, the atmosphere in your hometown, where you were, how you started playing music, a little bit about your family music life, etc.
Sure. Okay. Well, I started playing music as a very young child, probably about, not very, very young, but around 6 years old, when my father went to a medical conference and came home with recorders. And he came home with a bunch of recorders of different sizes, a consort of like instruments, as it were, and the Trapp Family Singers Method book for how to learn the recorder. So this was during the heyday of Mary Poppins, when that was actually a new movie. And, so the book alluded to them a lot. And so I learned to play the soprano recorder, and I became fairly accomplished with it. He hooked me up with recorder lessons, and I took recorder classes, and we had kind of a family recorder group. And so recorder was pretty much my first exposure to music. We belonged to the Washington Recorder Society because we lived in the DC suburbs. I believe at the time it was Silver Spring, Maryland, where we lived at the time. And it was a great scene to see 40 people getting together to play recorders, with all recorders of different sizes, including, who's ever seen a bass recorder? Oh my goodness. It's like 5 feet tall and it has a stand on it. I see Karen raising her hand. Yes, she knows about this type of thing. It looks almost like a bassoon. And then it has the tenor and the alto, and my father was an alto man, which is an F, and I'm a soprano man, which is in C. So, we had a lot of fun playing recorders together. And actually, the pinnacle of my musical career came with the recorder, insofar as I played at a concert of the Recorder Society where I was a soloist in Willem de Fesch's Sonata in G major for recorder and continuo, as transcribed by Franz Bruggen, a name I'm sure nobody's heard for a long time. But at any rate, okay, Karen knows this also, early music people. But at any rate, the sonata was quite a virtuoso turn of phrase, and I got written up in the Washington Star, which is my best review I've ever had. I was 8 years old. Right. The best thing the New York Times ever said about me was, and now even cheaper. For my recital at St. Paul's Chapel on the back of the Arts and Leisure section.
I was going to wait to hop into this, but I can't resist. Here it is, everybody. Your first blast from the past.
Here we go.
Can you all see this?
That's my Aunt Martha, my father's sister, and myself in our early attempts to learn how to play the recorder.
Yeah. Maybe the shortest will see your hair in all these photos, I believe.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So that it's interesting. In some countries, I know recorder is the starting instrument for many people. In Hungary and Israel, other places, because you can start making sounds pretty quickly. But you didn't stick with the recorder. What happened? How did you change from the recorder?
Well, my family was very oriented towards classical music. We didn't listen to any type of popular stuff at all. No Broadway, no Perry Como, no anything like that. And so we pretty much listened to Vivaldi and Telemann and Mozart and Dvorak and Beethoven, et cetera, et cetera. And I just became hooked on the sound of the violin. And I started to ask my parents for violin lessons. And by the time I was around 7.5 or 8, I had started in with the violin.
And you left recorder behind at that point?
I always have still fussed around with it. I even still use it to teach a little bit, with my guitar, because we have a few little Renaissance numbers in our repertoire. And I'm fond of getting out my recorder to play the melodies along with the kids.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's
when we do the Renaissance numbers in book 2 and 3.
Yeah, well, you've already displayed something that I've often admired and noticed about you, Seth, which is that you have amazing recall for all sorts of things about music, whether it's particular performances, repertoire, things about particular musicians. And I'm sure we're going to hear more stories, but you've already touched on it. And in remembering the exact piece that you played on the recorder at that particular concert.
I
And
still have the music sheet.
yeah, so you started playing violin, and tell us about your, your years as a violinist, because obviously that's not your main instrument now. So
Sure.
something. Yeah.
Well, you know, considering my career, I can go ahead and tell this story because considering my career, it's a somewhat ironic twist because my father, my father used to joke all the time. He said, "Seth, you're the only boy lucky enough to have a Jewish mother for a father." And I never really quite understood what that meant until I became a parent myself. And he used to take me to all my violin lessons, and he would sit in on the lessons and watch me, and then he would help me practice at home. And of course, we were listening to classical music all the time in our home, so there was this environment of classical music, and we played music together when we got good enough at it.
Mm.
And the ironic part of it is that Mr. Essers, my violin teacher, Henry Essers, who was a wonderful teacher in the Washington D.C. area for many years, Mr. Essers was an elderly Dutch person, and he had a very dim view of the Suzuki method.
Mm.
And this is literally in 1967, 68, 69, when the Suzuki method was making a new splash in the United States. And they used to have a conversation after pretty much every lesson. They would sit and shoot the breeze. Now, I was, 8, 9, 10 years old, so parents sitting there talking for 10 minutes seemed like 3 hours to me.
Mm.
But it
Yeah.
seemed like they would spend endless time talking about things after the lessons. And one of the subjects that came up was how the Suzuki method was interfering with the violin in the United States.
Mm. That's very interesting, especially considering where your career has led you. But it also
Sure.
shows, even then you were fortunate, I guess, as your father said, to have a Jewish mother for a father, and he took a
Correct.
very active role, which I know, which you in particular in the school, we also, of course, promote and expect it, and understand that that's critically important to a young student's progress as a musician.
Sure. It
So
helps me quite a bit.
I do want to share another photo since it's relevant right here. This
Mhm.
is your second blast from the past, everybody.
Here we go.
So
That's
tell us
myself
about
on
this
the
photo,
left.
Seth.
On the left is me with the violin. In the middle is my little sister Sarah, who didn't really play an instrument yet. I think she was about 3 or 4 there. And on the right is my mom
Mm-hmm.
playing the violin, which I don't even remember her doing. I mostly think of her as playing the piano.
Uh-huh.
And then there's another behind the music stand you see there on the left is another fellow who's I don't remember who that was in the photo either. He's in the other pictures.
Uh-huh.
So this is a pretty fairly typical scene in our house. The music stands, the sheet music arrayed on them, and the playing of chamber music together. It was a pretty constant scene.
That's wonderful. And your sister eventually played cello, is that right?
Well, my other sister, I have two sisters. I have Sarah and Rebecca.
I see.
Sarah's the younger of the two of them, and Rebecca's the older.
Uh-huh.
Um, I'm older than them, and then there's my brother who's the youngest of the four.
Uh-huh. Okay. Very nice. So it's how wonderful to make music together at home. And I imagine you encourage that wherever possible with your students, where
Sure,
there's
absolutely.
musicians in the family.
Hmm.
And so you played violin. Did you play in any groups? Were you, would you consider like you were playing on ensembles locally, anything like
Well, I
that?
played in a couple of pickup youth orchestras, and a couple of I played in the school orchestra all the time and involved myself in challenges to get the concertmaster seat in the school orchestra, and my father became friends with the person named David Burchuck, who's the owner of the Dale Music Company, which is the biggest music store in the Washington D.C. area. My
Mm-hmm.
father was a physician, and so Mr. Burchuck was his patient, but their mutual interest in music soon overtook their relationship, and soon we were at their house playing chamber music with his friends. And Mr. Burchuck was quite well to do, so he had a big house in Bethesda with a swimming pool and a large parlor where chamber music was played, and he had over a lot of people. They were the ones that hooked me up with the people that we played the recorder sonata with.
Uh-huh. Wonderful. Well, I do have one more picture to share of you as a young violinist
Sure.
with a friend of yours. Would you like to say something about this photo, Seth?
Sure, absolutely. This is one of the youth orchestras that I was involved in, and one of the practices. This young boy's name, interestingly enough, was John Williams, and John was quite an accomplished violinist. I would say he was probably a bit more advanced than myself, but we took to each other as being kind of the top fiddlers in the group, and so I have fond memories of meeting with him at these rehearsals, and so I don't know what happened to him because when this group. When I stopped coming to this group, we did not stay in touch. I'm sorry to say, but this fellow, I have nice memories of him.
And for those who don't know, John Williams is also the name of a famous composer of of all sorts of movie music that I imagine a lot of people will recognize.
Harry
Uh,
Potter, Indiana Jones,
yeah, yeah, many
Star
movies.
Wars.
Yeah, all sorts of lots and lots of movies. So, Seth, then do you, first of all, I know you obviously switched to guitar at some point, but do you still play violin?
Yes, I do.
Uh-huh.
I keep a violin, and violins are a funny thing because you can't just let it sit in the case because it will start to fall apart. Violins are not fully glued together the way guitars are. The bridge can fall off and the sound post, etc., um, and the tailpiece. So every couple of months I go in the case and pull it out and run through a few things. The Vivaldi A minor concerto, the famous Jack Benny Etude by Kreutzer. I refer to it that way because that's what my dad always called it.
Yeah.
I think any older violinist in the group will remember what that means.
Uh-huh.
The people who are rock fans will know it as the little bit of Kreutzer he quotes in Eddie Van Halen's Eruption.
Okay. Well, that's definitely something we're going to talk to. The fact that you can quote things about Eddie Van Halen shows you are a multi-interested guitarist, not just classical music.
No doubt.
So you had recorder, you had violin.
Mhm.
How did guitar happen?
Well,
let's hear
okay,
the story.
so I stayed with Mr. Essers till I was about 13, I suppose, maybe 12 or 13, and then he retired, and his wife had made him many years before a promise to move to Colorado, where her family was when he retired. So they did move away to Denver, and at that point, I kept trying to find another teacher, and I never found somebody else that I quite fit with. And at the same time, I was starting to hear, when I was 10 years old, and they would. In my time, they would have indoor recess at school on a rainy day, and they would play records and dance. I found this to be an excruciating activity because they would play the Archies and they would play, all this stuff, and I would stand around going, "No musical value, no musical value," because I was just that sort of obnoxious kid. And at any rate, at some point, I heard some rock and jazz music that had musical value to me, and I started getting interested in the guitar, and in the absence of taking any violin lessons, I started to ask my parents to get me an electric guitar. Now, in a standard fashion of parents, they said, well, here's a classical guitar, and they bought me an inexpensive student guitar and the 2 Aaron Shearer books and said, here, learn these 2 books, and then we'll buy you the electric guitar. So they didn't really get me a teacher, so I started trying to learn from the books themselves, and I was smart enough with my fiddle experience to be able to figure out the first book, but I got to the second part of the book where you started doing more elaborate arpeggios and chords and melodies. I decided it was impossible. So I quit that. But I did not quit bugging my parents for a guitar. It's hard to get a teen to quit bugging their parents for whatever. But eventually they succumbed and said, we'll give you $200 or $250 for a guitar. And I said, that's terrible because all I can afford is a cheap Bradley guitar, which was the imitation knockoff brand of the day. So, because I've been, at the music store looking at the Fender Telecasters and the Stratocasters and the Gibson Les Pauls and drooling over them, and they cost $500, $600. Which is way too expensive. So not to be deterred, I started reading the classified ads in the newspapers and found a genuine Fender Telecaster for $150. The reason it came so cheap is because the person had sanded the green paint off of it and refinished it himself in sort of a sloppy way. But so I've got myself this guitar, and I was off to the races trying to become an electric guitarist.
Mm-hmm. So there you were. You had a classical training or a family with classical music around the house.
Yes.
You had played classical recorder, classical violin, but you became a teenager and you said, oh, I want to play rock and roll.
Correct.
Right? And how did that go?
Well, at first, my parents got me a teacher for this, and he worked in the back of a music store. I don't know if people in the classical, music world who play violin and cello and other things can appreciate the idea of the guitar shop with the little lesson rooms in the back. But it's a place where a lot of us in the guitar teaching business get our start. And you have to be back there with a cassette recorder so that the student can bring in a cassette of their favorite song, and you get to try to figure it out and show it to them. So this is a form of lessons that actually gave me my start in the teaching career. So at any rate, let's see, where was I? So I started studying with a fellow like that, and he showed me the basic bar chords and chords for blues and rock and roll. And after he started showing me more sophisticated jazz chords, I said, well, this stuff sounds too much like pop music, so I quit. Because I wanted to be like Led Zeppelin or Jimi Hendrix. I didn't want to sound like Barry Manilow. So at any rate, I started trying to forge my own way and spending a lot of time playing records at half speed on the turntable and trying to figure out my favorite songs. And I got to be halfway decent at it and had a number of basement bands, which we could never find a singer. That was always the obstacle. And
What,
so
what, what kind of music were you listening to and playing then?
definitely progressive rock and blues rock. So my
Uh,
favorite bands were Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix.
mm,
All stuff that's considered heavy duty classic rock today.
mhm, mhm.
And you know, s- um,
So how did you transition then to classical guitar?
well, what happened after the in my teenage years, I used the guitar to kind of ruin my academic career. I didn't do well in high school. I ended up in community college instead of at a prestigious institution as my parents wanted me to go to. So I went to community college, and I was lucky in that where I went is called Montgomery Community College in Rockville, Maryland, and actually has an amazingly good music department. And the professors there really cared about what we were doing. And I like to say that a music department like that, it was easy to get into, but hard to get out of. Because if you wanted to graduate with an associate's degree with good grades, you really had to work. And so many people kind of dropped out halfway through, but I stuck it out and got the 2-year degree. And so I started there as a violin major in the January semester, and I was having a great time playing the violin. And I was one of only 2 violin majors, and I don't think it's too horrible to say that I was actually the more advanced and more, better player of the 2 of us. And so he spent his whole time trying to make me feel like I wasn't any good. But at any rate, the faculty made me feel like I was doing pretty good. So I played with the faculty quartet in the St. Matthew Passion of Bach. I won the concerto competition and played Mozart's G major concerto with the school orchestra, or at least the first movement. And a few other accomplishments like that really helped me have an amazing time playing the violin. But all the time at the school recitals, there was a classical guitar going on. There was probably maybe 10, 15 guitar majors at the school, and they ranged all the way from what we would consider to be around a book 2 range, maybe book 3, to some fairly advanced players playing some tricky pieces like the Taroba Sonatina and Capriccio Arabe, or even Asturias Leyenda. And so I became fascinated by the classical guitar, which I didn't really know too much about. I'd had some exposure to it before this, but this exposure with my mind so turned to learning theory and arranging and all the other things, opening my mind to the actual techniques of professional musicianship. I saw the classical guitar in a new light, and I made the decision that I wanted to get out of violin and go into classical guitar. So the summer between the January semester and the fall semester, I spent practicing enough guitar to be able to pass the audition to become a guitar major. So at that point is that was kind of when I made my final transition to what I'm still doing, being a classical guitarist.
It's a fascinating path, Seth, in a way. You had several instruments before, which you were serious, with each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the repertoire you're talking about playing on the violin is very advanced repertoire, and you were serious about your rock, and you were serious about the recorder, and you came to guitar definitely compared to a lot of your young students much later than a lot of young guitarists. I'm
Absolutely. I
wondering.
was 20 years old when I started formal classical guitar lessons.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm wondering, that late start on that instrument, how do you think that impacted you as a teacher?
I think it made me more cognizant of how the learning process worked mechanically, so that I was more aware of what was going on. Whereas I think a lot of people, young people who learn to play an instrument and they go through all the basic mechanics of it at such an early age, and by the time they're 10 years old, they're in like book 6 or something like that. And then you ask them what they don't even know what it's like to not be able to play their instrument. It just seems so natural to put their hands on an instrument and make tone. It's hard for them to try to explain it to somebody else. So I think as a teacher, it helped me to be able to mechanically break things down to explain them to other people in a more natural way.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So then, you were at the community college, and then you transferred to Manhattan School of Music. Why the transfer?
Well, I wanted to get a 4-year degree at least, if not a master's degree. And so Montgomery College did not offer the 4-year degree, of course. It was just a 2-year school. So, the necessity was to transfer at the junior level. Now, I had, during my time at Montgomery College, I had gotten involved in listening to records by Manuel Barrueco, who's one of our prominent players of today, who at the time was kind of a new person on the block. Now, Dorothy Rothman and you guys will appreciate the fact that Manuel Barrueco and Sharon Isbin were serious rivals at the time. And there was a huge scandal in the guitar community when Sharon Isbin took first prize at the Toronto competition over Manuel Barrueco, because all the scuttlebutt said that Barrueco played better. But at any rate, they were both the leading young people at the time of guitar. And so Barwaco had these amazing records of Scarlatti and Giuliani, also Villa-Lobos and Bach, and all these amazing records. And on the back of it explained in his biography that he taught at the Manhattan School of Music. And that's when I learned of the existence of the school. So, when it came time, I applied there. And I also applied at Peabody and Boston Conservatory and New England Conservatory. And I took an audition tour of one weekend where I arranged to do all my auditions in the same 4 or 5 day period. So I went up to Peabody, and the guitar majors there said, "Oh, did you know Manuel Barwaco has left the position at Manhattan School of Music?" So I was shocked and horrified because I was on my way to audition there just for the sole purpose of trying to study with him. So at any rate, I made my way to the school. Nonetheless, the trip was all arranged. There was no point in bagging out at that point. So then I found out right before my audition that Carlos Barbosa Lima was going to be in the room, who was another giant hero of the guitar at that time, a little bit more established than Manuel was at the time. We all played his transcriptions of Scarlatti. He had all, Carlos is a legend on many books. He's a legend of guitar. So, it was a little intimidating to me to be told like 5 minutes before I auditioned, Barbosa Lima is in there. It's like, what? I knew that Sharon Isbin was going to be there. So my audition was heard by Sharon Isbin, Carlos Barbosa Lima, and a person named Stanley Bednar, whom I'm sure Dorothy remembers, who was the head of the string department in the college at the time. And and they accepted me, and I have to say, and I guess I can say it publicly now after so many years that I did actually choose Carlos as my teacher and put Sharon as my second choice. I'm sorry to say, Sharon.
Uh-huh. So before we move on and hear more about your training in MSM and then hear about you as a teacher, I want to share just a few more of the early photos of the early days of Seth Himmelhoch. So here, going back to your younger days as a young violinist, is here with one of your sisters.
That's with Rebecca now.
I just think that's an adorable photo.
Isn't that cute?
Yeah, very cute. This looks like it could be something recent here at Thurnauer with, brother and sister playing violin together. It's really sweet.
Well, we had a lot of that spirit.
Yeah, it's very sweet. And then here is Seth, a slightly older guitarist, playing some rock and roll, looking like a rock and roller, right?
Yeah, I was heavily into rock at the time, but I still picked up my violin to play. I love to try to play Bach suites. I was always trying to play the B minor partita, the doubles from the various movements of the B minor partita, and I also love to play the E major suite prelude, even though my teacher had expressly forbidden me to play it.
You mean figuring it out on electric guitar?
No, playing it on the violin.
Oh, the violin, of course. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is the guitar.
Those are the pieces that brought me back to the fiddle.
And this is the guitar that you bought with your first guitar that you bought, right?
Are you showing a picture of me playing the violin here?
Oh no, I'm looking at the guitar photo. Sorry, let me share again.
Because that was me in my basement playing the violin.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at this photo. Now do you see the guitar photo?
Here we go. Yep, that's my Fender Telecaster. That's it.
Yeah, and you still have that. You still have that.
Just made a recording with it the other day.
Amazing. Okay, so the other photo everybody saw of Seth in his basement playing guitar. Great.
Playing the fiddle.
Fiddle. Sorry. Yes, fiddle. With old. For those who don't know, I'll just for some of the younger students who are watching, these things back here are albums. Those are record albums.
Yes, you had a lot.
And then this is a cassette player back here.
There you go. And that's the funny looking Bang & Olufsen receiver and turntable on top of the bookshelf.
Very nice. Very nice.
My dad loved tech stuff.
All right. So Seth, now you arrive in New York City. You're a serious guitarist. You've auditioned. You're playing, practicing hard. Tell us about MSM and getting deep into the classical guitar world.
Well, MSM was definitely a thrilling place to go. It was a hotbed of guitar at the time. We had an amazing faculty. At a certain point, we had Barwaco, Barbosa Lima, Sharon Isbin, and Nicholas Galusis all teaching at the school at the same time. That was a heck of a jury to have to play for. So much guitar knowledge and ability just in one room. And the level was quite high, and a lot of people kind of came in and then just kind of got ground down. But I was very into it, and I practiced a lot. And they made me a freshman, even though I had 2 years, but they accepted me as a freshman. But I was determined to graduate in less than 6 years for my undergraduate, so I applied to jump over a year and did a special recital to do that. So that really helped out my progress. And then eventually I found out that they had a 1-year master's program, so I enrolled in that. And Barbosa Lima was an amazing teacher. I would go to his home, and he was a funny teacher because he's not the kind of teacher that I am or what we have at Thurnauer School. because he didn't really think about you very much. You know, Carlos is mostly into the music. He's into what he hears and sees right in front of him. So but he doesn't really think about you after you leave the room. So what you do is you go to Carlos and you play for him, and he tells you 500,000 amazing things, and then you leave the house and try to deal with them at your own home, and then you come back the next week and play for him again, and it's another information dump. But I think one of the funniest things that happened to me was I would have his books of his transcriptions, so I would play them for him, and have a certain fingering, and he'd say, "What are you doing there?" I'd say, "Oh, it's this finger." He says, "Oh, I don't do that anymore," right? So I started to find out that professional performers who make records and play in big concert halls are a little bit more free with the music than I imagined that they were. Like another piece that I was playing, the Taroba Nocturno, by Federico Moreno Taroba. At a certain point, he said, "Why don't you add some octaves here? This would sound much better." It was shocking to me because when I was a boy playing Vivaldi or Telemann or Beethoven, you didn't add notes to what they were doing. You didn't change it around. But I started to find out that the professionals really do that sort of thing because they adapt it to their own style. And I started to learn that when you get, when 500 people pay $50 to come and hear you play it the way you want to, right? But so Manhattan School of Music was a place where those kind of people were teaching. So it was a really thrilling place to go to school. And other things that I learned were don't say yes to a composer unless you're really willing to work hard.
Uh-huh.
Because you'll be sitting in the lobby and a composer will casually say, "How would you like to play my new piece?" You'll be sucked into their spider's web of rehearsals. And I learned how to count 1 2/3 4 time. And other strange tricks like that.
Okay, that we'll have to think about. That could be use that in our theory classes someday. But and were you also going to hear performances by guitarists coming through town? I mean,
Absolutely. And that was why I had come to New York. It's funny because when I told everybody I was going to go to New York, people were like, "Oh no, New York is terrible. It's a sewer. It's a pit. It's just nothing but crime and horribleness." And I was like, "Well, I want to go there anyway because all the best guitarists are there." So then I go to visit for my audition, and I'm coming out of the subway on the Upper West Side and looking at Riverside Park and going, "New York is really nice. I like New York." And Manhattan School of Music, and it was, it's a beautiful building, and the facilities are wonderful there, and eventually I recognized, well, yeah, there's some problems with the city. People get mugged all the time, but the '80s were a different time in New York City.
Right. And do you have any memories of particular performances you saw of particular guitarists when you came to New York?
Sure. I definitely saw Manuel Barrueco perform, and he played at Town Hall in New York City. And he was amazing. He sat down and played the most difficult. His Scarlatti Sonata album opens with this D major sonata that starts with incredible double trills and then amazing scales. And he sat right down on stage cold as ice and played that the first thing. It's like, my God, it was like the guy in Top Gun, the Iceman. I'll make an '80s movie reference for an '80s occurrence. Then there was they used to give out free tickets to us at MSM. You go into the office and you'd say, what comp tickets do you have available? And I went with a fellow named Vincent to see Narciso Yepes, who was famous for playing the 10-string guitar. And Yepes was playing, and Vincent just got up and said, "This guy's terrible. He's awful," and he just stalks out of the concert hall. This is at Carnegie Hall. That's like, okay, I think he's playing pretty good. He's definitely better than both of us. So listen, but people were very high-handed. The guitarists were very opinionated and high-handed, and one of the things I learned about the school was that no one was ever going to tell you that you played well. No one was ever going to say, "Wow, man, you're good." It's never ever going to happen. What you learned is that if they were talking to you, they thought you were good. And if they didn't think you were good, they just wouldn't be talking to you.
Whoa, that's a pretty harsh reality to think about. But
it was kind of a tough school that way.
Yeah. I hope it's mellowed since then a little bit at least.
I remember listening to me play Villa-Lobos Etude, a Korean cello player, and when I was done, she goes, "So what are you going to do when you graduate? Play rock?" Right.
Well, so when you so you're finishing up at MSM. Tell us how did you? I don't know if we're jumping ahead here, but how did you come to start teaching at Thurnauer? And how did you start getting into teaching?
Well, okay, getting into teaching is simple. I had a friend who played. He was my roommate, who was a bass player, Andy, and Andy had a job in New Jersey teaching in a guitar shop. So he said, "There's an opening. Why don't you start coming there?" And I needed some spare money, and I didn't want to work in Burger King or in a pizza joint. So I said, sure, I'll go teach with you. So we went out to New Providence, New Jersey by the bus and train, and I started teaching for $4 a half hour. And I had some nice experiences teaching kids. I discovered that Metallica is very complicated, right, as rock and roll music goes, because this kid brought in a song called Master of Puppets, which is full of odd time signatures and crazy hard riffs. And I was like, I don't think I can teach this to you in half an hour. I don't think I can learn it in half an hour. But it was an interesting challenge. And the owner of the store taught jazz, so I took my first formal jazz lessons with Gary Keller, who was the owner of the Guitar Studio, was the name of it. And so I taught there, and that was my main job for a while. And then so I started teaching because on my way to becoming the next Columbia Music Star of Guitar, it was a better job than than Burger King, right? So, but then eventually,
you seem to like it right away, though, from what you're saying.
I did. What I discovered is that I liked kids, and I felt, if you stick me in a room with a 6-year-old for half an hour and a guitar, I can pass the time very easily, and talk about fun stuff. And the thing that was frustrating to me is at the time is that I couldn't get them to learn anything, right? We could pass the time, and they'd tell their parents they had a good time, and tell them that they learned something, so they'd want to pay me again. But I wasn't satisfied with the idea of just getting money and nobody learning anything. That offended my sensibilities. So now cut to a couple years later, and I played a vocal recital with a person named Mary Schiefen, and Mary Schiefen also taught at the then JCC School of Music, and knew a person named Mrs. Dorothy Rothman, who had started a music school not too long before that, and so Dorothy called me on the phone because she was looking for a guitar teacher. And that's how I got started teaching in northern New Jersey. New Providence is obviously, out past Newark, out west of Newark. Right? So I got my first Bergen County job from Dorothy. Thank you, Dorothy. And
what do you remember about that, I don't know, that conversation? I think you told me it was a pretty interesting conversation.
it certainly was because, I was on the phone, and, she called me on the phone, and I started to talk to her about what I did and, what I was doing. And she was saying very positive things to me. And I was starting to get the feeling that I was going to be working there already, even though we'd just been speaking on the phone for 5 minutes. And I learned later, correct me if I'm wrong, Dorothy, but that Mrs. Rothman was with Sandra Gold, the other founder of the school at the time, and that Sandra was saying, Dorothy, just slow down a little bit. You have to actually meet this person first. Isn't that right, Dorothy?
Yeah.
Right.
So the story is that I had been trying to reach you for quite a while, and I finally reached you when I was at Sandra's house.
Sure, okay.
And you were so enthusiastic
Okay.
and excited about teaching and eager that
Sure.
I just felt I knew you were going to be just right for our school. And
Right.
so I hung up the phone from talking with you, and I turned to Sandra and I said, I know that Seth is going to be at our school. I know I want to hire him. I want him to be at the school.
Sure.
And Sandra said, you can't do that. You don't do it like that. You
Right.
can't just hire someone over the phone. I said, well, I know, but I just have a feeling. And
Sure.
then we did meet, and I remember being so impressed because we had one student for a half an hour. That was it.
Mhm.
And I said, Seth, I don't know how we can make this work because I can't possibly pay you enough
Right.
for your expenses to even come out to
Sure.
New Jersey because you were still in Manhattan.
I was
And
in Western Heights.
yeah, and you said, don't worry about it. We have to start someplace. And then I was even more convinced that you were absolutely the right person for building a program. And then I think we started talking about the Suzuki method.
Sure. That was after I'd been there for a few weeks.
Yeah. And I said, let's see if we can build a Suzuki program. And
Yep.
you started going to all these conferences and
Well, the way that it
learning
worked is
about
that,
it.
you had said, Seth, you should find out about the Suzuki method. And the first few times you said, I was like, oh, yeah, sure. Okay. But then eventually you kept talking about it. I said, well, okay, I'm interested. So, if you can pay me to, get me money for the tuition to do one of these workshops, then I'll go ahead and do it. And so within a week, you had already put it together.
Yeah.
Here's the workshop, and it's in Logan, Utah. It's like Logan, Utah. Where in the world is that? Right? So I got to learn a little bit about the United States, insofar as I'd never been out west in that way before. So I went there and studied with Frank Longuet for a week, and Frank was just amazing. He just dumped so much stuff on us all at once, and I was incredibly impressed by his thoroughness of how he thought through how to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I had taken guitar pedagogy at Manhattan School of Music, where we'd analyzed the teaching of guitar technique at the highest level. How to get students to be able to play the concert repertoire of Bach's suites and the concertos. But Frank approached Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with the same type of precision and the same type of intensity that somebody like Carlovaro or Aaron Shearer approached playing a Bach suite. And so that impressed me. And then the other thing that impressed me was his students, that he had these two girls that he brought along with him, both named Shannon from California. And Shannon were, I think, 11 and 13. And they were accompanied by one of their mothers. And so we had to play this, an example of their attitude towards things was we had to play a Telemann quartet in D major in the end of the week concert. Suzuki workshops always end with a concert at the end of the week. And so we learned this piece in order to play it. And, we were all given the parts. And I was up in my dorm room at Utah State University. We all stayed in the dorm for the Institute. There was no hotel nearby. And so we're all staying in the rather Spartan dormitories. And so I'm sitting there practicing in my room, and suddenly there's a knock at the door. And I open the door, and there's Shannon and Shannon with their mother. Now, mind you, these kids had taken 5 hours of guitar class earlier the same day, right? And so now it's around 8:30 in the evening, and here they are coming back. And they was like, "Can we practice the Telemann piece with you?" Right? So I said, "Okay, sure, why not?" So in comes the two girls and the mom. We all set up and we start rehearsing, every bit as intently as any ensemble I'd done at Manhattan School. And we played the piece a bunch of times, and finally the mom goes, "Okay, it's late, it's like 9:30, we have to go." And the girl's like, "No, we don't want to go. We want to practice more." Like, okay, this is a different kind of child that I've never really experienced before. And that was definitely a formative experience for me. And Frank also had videos of his own kids playing very, very difficult music at very young ages, and with wonderful tone and posture. And so Frank was just a huge mentor for me and an example for me throughout my whole career. I'm still trying to catch up to his example of how he did things.
Well, Seth, we have a photo I'm happy to share now of you with Frank Longuet. So this seems like
Sure.
a good opportunity to share that photo, if I understand it correctly.
Sure.
Is this the photo, Seth?
Yeah, this photograph includes Frank Longuet. He's the fellow in the red shirt in the middle, in the back row. So let's see. If we look at the back row, starting from the left, is a person named Michael Gendron, who's a marvelous teacher and teacher trainer from Providence, Rhode Island. Then next in the back is me, right, and with a lot less gray hair. And then continuing to the right is David Madsen in the back row, who's head of guitar at Hart School for the Suzuki method there. And he's an amazing teacher trainer and guitar teacher. Next, with the red shirt, as I mentioned, is Frank Longuet and the mustache. And then behind the fellow in the front row, behind Celso, is Harald Soderberg from Sweden, who's an amazing guitarist and teacher trainer from Sweden. Next is Andy Lafreniere, who's another guitarist from Connecticut, who's a wonderful guitar teacher. And then in the last one in the back row is Mark Marston from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's an amazing teacher as well. Now, this event was this International Suzuki Guitar Festival of 2008, held in Cupertino, not Cupertino, what city was it in?
Los Gatos.
Los Gatos is where this party was, but the event was in Santa Clara. It was right next to the Google headquarters down there.
And who's in the front row, Seth?
So in the front row, on the front right, is Nuria Cervantes, teacher trainer from Spain, in the dark hair. And the next one, in the black top and blonde hair, is Zia Reardon, who's the main guitar teacher in Australia, the principal teacher trainer there. And she is also the person who's invited me several times to go to Australia, and she's my connection to the Australian guitar community. She's an amazing person and has incredible students. The fellow in front of Frank Longuet and Harald Soderberg is Celso Machado. He's an incredible virtuoso guitarist, virtuoso of several other instruments, and a composer. And he was not there as a Suzuki teacher. He was there teaching workshops in Brazilian music. And he's just an unbelievable person. So musical and so enthusiastic about music. I played a bunch of Brazilian choro music with him during the spare hours of the festival and learned so much from him. So Celso is just an amazing, inspiring guy. We've performed his ensemble music in concerts at the JCC, so he's just a wonderful person. So in the center, in the blue shirt that's tie-dyed, is Michelle Horner, who's a Suzuki teacher from Connecticut, who's got some kids auditioning for the master class this year. Then seated is Mary Lou Roberts, who's the teacher trainer and committee member and board member of the Suzuki Association from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and she's a wonderful teacher of guitar. And then next is Diana Chagall. It's the last one in the front on the left is a teacher trainer from Argentina. She's one of the first two teacher trainers from Argentina who are part of the guitar committee of the Suzuki Association of the Americas. And so I'm very proud and happy to say that we're really becoming an association of the Americas and not just of North America. So now we have to have somebody translate for our meetings because Diana doesn't speak much English and my Spanish is just as bad. So, but at any rate, we make ourselves understood and we have a lot to say. So this workshop, the 2008 International Suzuki Workshop, was definitely a high point in my guitar Suzuki life in terms of the people that were together there. And I'm privileged to consider most of these people my friends and colleagues. We stay in touch on the Suzuki Guitar listserv and by emails and run into each other at various things here and there. So this picture is very meaningful to me.
Very nice. Well, I'm so glad you found it and shared it. Can you say a little bit more, Seth, about your involvement in the Suzuki world, specifically Suzuki guitar world? I'd love to hear a little bit about the workshops you've given, the teacher training you've done, the help with the literature, the books, the Suzuki books that I know you were involved with, and what it's meant to you as a teacher.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the books because my first involvement was as a teacher trainee, or in the current parlance, a teacher workshop participant. I was, I took the same course with Frank. I took book one with Frank like 4 times, but we didn't talk about book one any of the other times except for the first one. And pretty soon I discovered he was using a very bad computer program to publish the music, and I had learned a better program called Finale. So I said, Frank, let me copy all these Suzuki pieces into Finale so that when you hand out handouts, they actually look like real music instead of these horrible computer printouts that you're handing out. So he agreed to that, and so that was my first inroad into the whole direct process of being involved in creating the books, was literally creating these mock-ups of the books on Finale. And so it gave me a chance to kind of tweak things to make them look more the way that I wanted. Because one of the things I studied with Carlos Barbosa Lima was not just performing, but also how to edit guitar music and transcribe it from other instruments to the guitar. So Carlos taught me so much about how music is published and the details of how notes are presented and and formatting and all that kind of stuff. So I was trying to help apply that to the Suzuki pieces that we had. And so Frank began to rely on me more and more to create these mock-ups because he was getting himself more involved in the various political elements that were important in order to make the method happen. So as time went by, I stopped taking teacher training because I was so busy working with Frank directly on these things. And then eventually in 1995, he invited me to join the guitar committee. So the guitar committee includes myself, that fellow Andy on the right, and Mary Lou and Michael Gendron are all part of the guitar committee for the Suzuki Association of the Americas. And we are one of the 3 committees that contributes to the creation of the books. Now, on each committee, there's a representative who goes to the International Guitar Committee to actually create the books, but our committee provides input and commentary on each piece and on each element within the books in order to create a community process. So each of the 3 committees puts in their suggestions, and then the International Committee kind of hashes it all out. Now, back in the day, at this time, Frank was the representative to the International Committee. Now it's Mary Lou Roberts, the woman we see seated on the left. She's the international representative, but we all get to put in our suggestions. Now, another thing that I did at the time was I also volunteered to make recordings of what were then called the provisional books. So, there was the book as planned, although not actually published. But if we were going to use them with children, there needed to be recordings. So the SAA paid for studio time to actually make these recordings, even though they didn't actually pay us to make them. So I made book 2 and book 3, and then Andy, I don't know, I forget exactly how it played out. But what it ended up with is being that myself and Andy, the fellow on the right that I was pointing out, are the ones who played on all the songs in books 2, 3, and 4. So so making the recordings. You're being
heard by students around the world in their training. What is it meant to, if you could tell us briefly about your time traveling, many places and interacting with all these people, and also teaching in Australia. What
I consider myself incredibly lucky to have done that. I've definitely involved myself in seeing and experiencing things much more diverse than I would have had I stayed as a homebody in New Jersey. And so I've been to internationally. I've been to I've been to Canada and Australia, and throughout the U.S. I've been in many states: Connecticut, Rhode Island, California, Utah, Colorado, Texas. I've been around to a lot of different states to take workshops and also to teach workshops as well. And so I've had a wonderful time meeting students and families everywhere and other teachers. It's really meant a lot to me. It's given an incredible richness to my career as a Suzuki teacher, and so it's been a fantastic thing. I definitely consider myself fortunate to that. And one of the greatest experiences has been going to Australia, because it's such an interesting place. That's it's so similar to what we experience here in the U.S. and yet so different in its own way.
And I know you recently during COVID had an exchange, right, with where you taught some students there, and the Australian teacher taught some of our students, correct?
Yes, correct. So we had a master class where Zia taught a few of my students, and I did a master class for her students earlier this fall.
Wonderful. And so let's talk more about your time at Thurnauer. I mean, it's really more than, it's almost like we need a whole other conversation just about that. But
Sure.
you had, I can't even count the numbers. I'm sure you know what, it's probably something like 33 years or so at the school. And
Yes.
I mean, tell us a little bit about, I know you alluded to a little bit, you were talking about a little bit with Dorothy earlier, starting the program, but
Yes.
what tell us about what you've built, what your goals are with students that you work with, working with the parents that you work with.
Okay.
Give us your insight into your approach to teaching.
Well, I definitely am very enthusiastic about what Suzuki promoted in terms of using music as an enrichment for people's lives. The idea that music is a special art form in which people can experience more sensations or intellectual experiences and more emotional experiences and more artistic experiences in one activity than in most other activities. Even brain science has gotten in on this picture to observe the brain centers that are stimulated by different things like language and emotions and mathematics and other things like that. And they discovered that music fires off more centers of your brain than many other activities. So I've seen Suzuki making the statement that music had a special place in people's education to make them understand humanity and art and culture more deeply than they would if they weren't involved in it. And I definitely believe in that. And that's a big part of my goal of what I want to do as a music teacher. So on the one hand, we say we're not interested in producing professional musicians. We're interested in building fine children and fine human beings. And I definitely believe that statement. But at the same time, I also feel responsible for educating people properly, so that imagining if they would, that they become 12 years old and, as I did at the similar age, became enthusiastic about perhaps becoming a professional musician, that they were at least taught correctly, so that if they decide to really take off with it, that they have the good foundation already. So I would say that my own teaching has been, sometimes I joke around by saying, my methods that are so effective that you can practice only 20 minutes a day, and by the time you're 15, you'll be in book 6 and be able to play Bach's Bourrée. Right? Because I'm not the kind of
Can you
teacher.
say more what you mean by that example, Seth?
Yeah, I'm not really the kind of teacher that is very, I'm not a very pushy sort of person, and I'm not really into, I don't really know how to apply pressure to people very well, when it comes right down to it. So I have always allowed music to put its own pressure on people, the sense that music kind of demands an obligation from you. You take on the idea that you want to learn to play a certain piece, and you start trying to play it, and you realize, I can't play this. And the music itself kind of looms in front of you, and your own commitment motivates you to actually do something about it and to get better at the piece. And so I've always relied on that a little bit more on my own than on my own ability to say, what's the matter with you? Why aren't you practicing more? Or, so these things. So I would say that I'm more amiable than that kind of teacher, but at the same time, I'm quietly there all the time saying, let's do it right. Let's take the time to do it the right way. So I would say that my students perhaps maybe progress a little slowly than some other teachers' students, but I feel that where they are is very solid, and that they, that where they are is where they really are. You're not like a book 4 student playing at a book 2 level, really.
Right. I'm sure you've seen some of that in your travels.
I certainly have.
And you've been teaching for decades. How do you feel you've developed as a teacher?
I think that I'm more perceptive and more sensitive to things now than I used to be, and I think that I'm more able to find out what the right priority is to try to focus on at a given moment. And I'd like to think that, and also I have more understanding of different people's situations. and more sympathy for people. You know, I used to be more young and sort of doctrinaire insofar as I read a book and took a workshop and I learned the rules, and now I'm going to go out there and enforce them. Whereas now I'm a little bit more like, you know, here's a person in front of me. What do they need to make themselves be successful? You know, here's a person on the screen in front of me.
Right, right. And I know at Thurnauer you teach the oops. You're still there. Good. Okay.
Yes.
Lost you for a second. I know at Thurnauer you teach the parents for a few weeks before you teach the students. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Now this is all based once again on Dr. Suzuki's own approach. Dr. Suzuki, according to what I've read, did not actually tell parents to tell their children that they were going to learn the violin. So he said, what you have to do is to drag your 3-year-old to your own violin lesson. And you stick them in the corner and give them a lollipop or something to keep them happy and say, now be quiet because mommy's going to have a violin lesson. And so then you start to have a violin lesson and you keep doing this for a few weeks, and then eventually the child will say, may I learn violin too? And then at that point, you've started the whole process. So you'd say, yes, you may learn the violin too. Now, the parents that I teach and the kids that I teach were way more hip to what was going on than any of this kind of scenario that Dr. Suzuki laid out. Insofar as pretty much everybody that studies with me, the child said, I want to learn guitar. And they said that to the parent, and then the parent goes, well, I better find a guitar teacher because my child says they want to learn guitar. So obviously that whole charade that I just mentioned is not going to happen. But nevertheless, I still believe that the example of the parents sitting down and learning twinkles and the children seeing that and seeing the parents actually practice. And you know, I've seen some parents over the years struggle with twinkles. Twinkles are not easy to play properly. You know, to bang out the song Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star is one thing, but to sit in proper position and to play it right, it's not that easy. So, you know, I've seen parents actually struggle with it. And so, number one, it gives the children an appreciation of the fact that it's going to be a learning process. And number two, it gives the parents an appreciation of the fact that what their kids are going to be doing is not that easy. So they can't sit back and go, what's the matter with you, kid? It's only Twinkle, because they know that they struggle with themselves, right? And so then also the technical knowledge of what's happening with the guitar, you know, the different strokes and how the staff works and how the guitar notation is done, that's been very helpful for the parents as the years go by and they get into more complicated music. And they had to be coached to a book 2 or 3 student, and they weren't able to play book 2 or 3 themselves. But they understand what a thumb stroke is, and they know what a rest stroke means, and you know what it means to have a half note and all the other stuff. So that it's been useful for that. So I took the idea from Dr. Suzuki, and you know once again I give credit to Mrs. Rothman insofar as you know when I was early on in my Suzuki teaching, I did not have a parent teaching program, but after a couple of years I started hearing other people with programs saying that they taught the parents first. And so I did some research into different schools around the United States of what they did, and I found that the average school had 2 or 3 months of parent training before the kids actually began. So Mrs. Rothman allowed me to design my own parent training program and to include that in my teaching right from the time that I first wanted to try it. And so, you know, right away I noticed that it improved what was happening with my students, and so it's something I've been doing ever since.
Could you say a little bit more about, I know because we spoke about it,
Sure.
Could you say a little bit more about how Dorothy has influenced you as a teacher? I know she teaches violin, those of you who
Sure.
don't know that, but she did study herself with Dr. Suzuki, has been teaching violin for more than 60 years, the founding director of our school, but I know she's had a profound influence on you as a teacher. Could you speak to that a little bit, Seth?
Absolutely. Well, you know, just the little things like introducing me to the Suzuki method and getting me to start training in that of course starts with that. And then just setting an example of her own caring and nurturing approach to students in which she was always there for her students and always thinking about what the student's needs would be and not putting her own needs ahead of the student. You know, looking at how a student needs to have the proper bowing arm and the proper left hand position and to have good intonation, you know, that those things come first. And you know, that you have to be very patient with kids and just keep teaching them as long as they need to go on each step until they're ready to go on to the next step. So, you know, so as an embodiment of what the Suzuki method is all about, Dorothy has been there over the years to set an example for me. And then the other thing is that she was also very supportive of me in terms of my own work, because whenever I had an idea of something that seemed sensible to do, she always said, yes, go ahead and try that. So the parent training program, you know, different ways of doing graduation recitals, different ways of you know, engaging people in the process. You know, she's always been there for me in supporting what I do. So I've been very lucky in that way.
That's wonderful. And I know you have a story relating to music theory and how Dorothy supported you with that. Do you want to tell that story, Seth?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, at first, when I designed my program, I designed a program in which there would be the private lesson for the student, a guitar group class for each student, and that would be it. But I would attempt to include in the group class not only the work of learning the guitar repertoire, but also note reading and the idea of musicianship. That I would divide the hour into those two things. So I thought, well, okay, my students don't really need a separate musicianship class, and plus I'm having a hard time getting them to practice enough when they have to come to the JCC 3 times a week. So, Dorothy supported me in that and said, well, we can make an exception for your program that people don't have to take the theory class. So that lasted for a few years. But then at a certain point, Dorothy was going through the school, and I know that you were involved in the transition as well, to try to make sure that the school was a little bit more universal in its approach, and that everybody who was teaching their kids all had kind of a similar experience to each other. And so one of the things was that everybody was to take theory class. So she said to me, Seth, I want you to have all your kids take the theory class in the musicianship. And so I said, okay, let's give it a try. And so the thing that's happened since then is, I've had the benefit of being around for a few years since that time to see the results. And the results are good. I would have to say that the kids that have been through the musicianship definitely do better with guitar than the ones who have not. It's funny because when I look at my college career as a musician, I learned so much faster as a college guitarist than the other guitar majors with me because, when somebody opened a book of music to me and it said allegro, I knew what that meant. When it said stringendo, I knew what that meant. When it said ritardando, I knew what that meant. People would say, you need to make that third more in tune. I understood what they meant. So, all the culture and terminology of the classical music world was all very second nature to me as an advanced violinist learning the guitar. But, I knew what a concerto was. I knew what a rondo movement was. I knew all this stuff. But so many kids that came into guitar major, they had no idea of any of these things. They wouldn't know an oratorio from an ostinato, if I can make a snobby music joke.
That's a good one. Yeah.
But the idea is that I found that in a similar way that the kids that took the theory and the ear training had an inner sense of the music that was much stronger for them than the ones who didn't take that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm glad that you have found that to be a positive experience for your students. Speaking of teaching adults, I'm going to go share a photo. It's been a while since we've shared a photo.
Sure.
I hope this works. Can everybody see this photo of a few parents doing their debut performances?
Yes. Here's me and Jonathan on stage with.
Yep, Jonathan Trotter on the left, also a member of our guitar faculty for many years.
Yes.
And you not only have the parents take a few lessons, but you have them give a performance, right?
It's voluntary. I asked
voluntary, right? But I can tell you from having talked to many of them that they find the experience very valuable for when their children eventually go up to perform. They can relate
Sure.
to what their children are going through. So I'm happy I was able to share this photo. So Seth, if you had to give advice, to a young teacher, and if you had to say what you find most rewarding about teaching and what most challenging, can you sum that up briefly?
Wow, that's an interesting question.
It's a broad question, but
Ask it again.
well, what advice would you give to a young teacher of guitar or a young teacher of
What to
music?
do and what not to do.
What do you find most what do you love most about teaching? What do you find most challenging?
I would have to say it's the same thing for both. I find the people the most interesting and the people the most challenging. Because when you teach the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to like 150 kids, it's never the same.
Can you say more about that, Seth?
Yeah, well, people ask me, how do you listen to Twinkle and Lightly Row, every day for 30 years? So, well, I don't hear the song, I hear the child. I hear the particular personality behind that song. Part of it, I love the same music that I've always loved, but at the same time, I can listen to students play Twinkle all day long, and it never sounds boring because every kid plays it differently, and every kid learns it differently, and you had to explain it differently to every child. And you'd like to make a formula for exactly the steps you're going to take to teach Twinkle to one child, and then apply them exactly the same in the same order to the next child. But you try that and it just doesn't work. They don't understand. So you had to switch how you're explaining it to the next child because they didn't understand what the first child related to what you were doing really well, but then you do the same thing to the next child and they're like, I don't get it. And then you had, at that moment you had to realize, I had to think of something else. Because when you're teaching, there's a moment when you teach, when you get a child into a risky position. You say, we're going to learn this part of the song. and then you say you have 10 minutes in the lesson left. So you say we're going to learn this part of the song, and then you get into it and you realize they're not getting it, and there's this look on their face like I'm not getting it, and then you start trying to get it, and you try 3 or 4 things and none of them work. And that's a very bad situation for you as the teacher, and very bad for the student. You want to leave. You don't want to end the lesson saying, "Well, we didn't quite get it. We'll try it again next week." You want them to actually get something out of it. So you had to salvage the situation by finding a way that they understand to explain whatever you're doing. So maybe you need to demonstrate it for them better. Maybe you need to make a diagram on a piece of paper. Maybe you need to have them, break it into smaller steps somehow. You just have to find another way to do it. And this process of trying to recast all the learning for each child individually is pretty much a universal thing for teaching music because, like I said, not every kid learns the twinkles in a slightly different way.
It's a beautiful statement that you said a minute ago, Seth, that you're not teaching, and I'm not sure if I'm getting it right, you're not teaching the music, you're teaching the child, or you're not hearing Twinkle, you're hearing the child.
I'm hearing the child, absolutely. I don't hear Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for the 18 millionth time. I hear so-and-so playing Twinkle, Twinkle.
Right. That's profound. Now, you've been, like we said before, you've been teaching at Thurnauer for literally decades, and you've had a lot of accomplishments, a lot of experiences. I'd like to hear you sort of reflect on some of your highlights of your time at Thurnauer, some of the key moments or key experiences that stick out in your mind, and also say a little bit more about the earliest days and what that was like, because I wasn't even around for that.
Right. Yeah, the earliest days of the school were very interesting. The whole wing where our music school is didn't even exist. So what was the drama office was then the music office, and we used to teach in rooms all around. What is, I guess, now room 205 or 206, that was the prime choice room there on the wall-top gallery, and that's where Dorothy taught her group classes. But at any rate, they finally built the music school for us, but it was kind of a interesting thing to watch it grow. It was always a new idea coming around, and new different things, and we just had a few teachers at first, and then more and more, and now how many students are in the school? Like 500 students now.
Mm-hmm.
It's
yeah,
just
something
amazing.
like that. Yeah.
Amazing. And then there's incredible people like Emma Brondolo, who doing what she does with her chorus, and Steve Mozzie, the recital the other day, the Appassionata Sonata. Oh my God, it was like the young child gets out and starts playing. They're doing the Appassionata by Beethoven. It's like, oh my goodness. But at any rate, so it's just been an incredible school to be part of. So it's pretty much a high point all the time being around the school. But some high points included some of the gifted music concerts where my kids have gotten to play with amazing artists, and the ones that stand out the most for me are of course the guitarists. So I'm thinking of Larry Coryell, the jazz player, and then Sharon Isbin last year, the guitarist. I think our Sharon Isbin's performance with the kids was definitely a huge high point for me in terms of the guitar. And right.
That was really special. Yeah.
I'll pick on poor Chris, who's here on the Zoom call, because I remember we were all backstage waiting to go out and play, and Chris goes, "Sharon Isbin is over there," right? And his mom is saying, "Chris, calm down, it's okay," right? And we were all so excited to play with her, and the whole process of getting Sharon to actually play "Go Tell It, Rhodey" and French folk song with the children, it took to the very last rehearsal, 5 minutes before the program, to actually clinch that deal. In which Sharon agreed. Sharon agreed that she would play through it with us, but not play it in the concert.
Yeah.
Because she'd already agreed to play the Valse Natalia with us in my arrangement for the kids, and that was huge. That she, when Sharon accepted my arrangement of Natalia to play with my kids, that was a high point for sure. Because
that's wonderful.
I happen to know about Sharon. I've known her for many years and peripherally, and I know that she doesn't do what she doesn't want to do.
Yes.
She's the true MSM person. If she thinks you're playing well, she'll talk to you. If she doesn't think you're playing well, she won't talk to you. She'll just say no.
She was so terrific she was so generous with our students at the gala and in the masterclass that she taught.
The masterclass too, she was wonderful. She's
amazing.
Not the kind of person she's not super jazzy and full of all kinds of crazy tricks, but she was just straight ahead and right there and very clear and very caring.
Yes, she was, and I know that she was very impressed with our students, and that was a big honor, I think, and a big compliment to both you and Jonathan, that she was so impressed with the students and how well prepared they were and how well they played. And you've been very instrumental in helping the Loring Masterclass series, Guitar Masterclass series, be such a success. And I'll share one photo of that, because just just a representative one, because the artist that you've in many cases helped us recruit to, is this showing? Can you guys see this?
Yeah, Rupert Boyd.
Yeah, this is Rupert Boyd, the Australian guitarist, with the students selected for that year's masterclass. And while we're on the topic of the masterclass, I'll give a little plug that next Monday at 4 p.m. We will have a masterclass by William Kanengeiser of the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet. This is someone who I know Seth has wanted to have as a masterclass artist for many years, but because of travel, it was very difficult to arrange. But one of the silver linings of COVID is that it'll be a virtual masterclass, and we'll be joined by him from Los Angeles. So that's very exciting.
Absolutely.
And do you want to do any memories or highlights of masterclasses from over the years, Seth?
Well, okay. The very first one that we had that was the Lorraine masterclass with Ben Verdery, and Ben teaching. Two of my students that passed the audition were both named Ben, and both of them had guitars made by Benjamin Garcia. So the whole Benjamin thing, and Benjamin just started going, look at all these Benjamins. You know, the guitars say Benjamin, and I'm Benjamin, and you're Benjamin. Oh my God, right? But Benjamin Verdery is just so full of ideas. He's, he goes a mile a minute, and by the time he's done with you, you're so inspired and excited, and perhaps a little giddy from the guitar because of his whole approach. So he was wonderful. And we've had some great artists like Jason Vio, and recently we had the fellow from the Brazil guitar duo, Joao Luis. And we had
Luis and David Leisner.
Everybody that's taught at the master class has been fantastic. Sharon Island,
Nick Alusis, and
yes, it's been a great experience every year.
Jason Vio.
That's right. And I missed the dinner afterwards. I really missed that this year.
Yeah, Berta Rojas was last year. We had a virtual master class with her.
Berta was amazing.
Right, and I know you referred to it earlier as one of your innovations, or one of the things that you worked on with Dorothy, is to have graduation recitals. And I think you told me it's one of the highlights of your experience. Here's one particular photo of a graduation recital. Is this showing, by the way?
Yes, it is. I see giving me the certificate to my student.
Yes. Do you want to say anything about those concerts and what those mean to you?
Well, when the program had fewer than 10 students, I had a little bit more time, and plus the theater was always free. The JCC itself has grown tremendously at the same time as the guitar program. So the Eric Brown Theater used to be pretty free. So when a kid would get to the end of the book, would just book the theater and play through the whole book on stage for their parents and for any friends we could get in. And that was a wonderful thing to do. But then we started to have too many students, and the theater became totally unfree, where we'd have to book the theater a year in advance to do anything. So the whole process of graduations had to take on a system much more like what Frank Longuet always did in his schools. So what I do now is I have the kids who are going to graduate from a book play for me all the songs of their book in one lesson. And so they have to make it through all the songs without me having to talk in between the songs about what they need to improve. And because that can take too much time and they don't make it through all the songs. And if they can play all the songs well enough for me to go, very nice, you might want to slow down a bit more at the end. Good job, next song. If that's all they hear, then they get through all their songs in one lesson, and they've now graduated from the book. They've earned a place on stage in what I call the graduation performance. So what we do is we take all the kids that have graduated from that book in that year, they all play the song with me at the end of the book, then they receive a certificate on stage. And here's the bestowing of the certificate is what's in that picture.
Oh, I know that those are proud moments for the students, the parents, and of course you.
Definitely for me, for sure.
I'm going to share another photo or two here just to give people who are watching who might not have a sense of the scope of some of our concerts. Here is a group class photo from one of the winter December concerts.
Yep.
And quite a lot of students on stage, and there's Jonathan again on the far left.
Yep.
Yeah, that's from a couple years ago. I'm sure you know every single person in that group.
I can't quite see them clearly, but I could deduce who they were if I looked at it long enough.
Yeah, there you go. And we just have quite a lot of photos of those wonderful concerts from over the years. And one person I know that you and I were both very fond of, Seth, I'd like to mention briefly from the early days of the school. He was at Thurnauer before I was Paul Sivertson.
Yes.
You wanted to say a few words about Paul, if I remember correctly.
Well, Paul, I remember him well. He unfortunately passed a year or two ago, and he was an experienced gig musician, in that he and his wife played 1 million club date gigs with their duo, The One and the Other, I think they called themselves, and they played popular songs at for parties and nightclubs, etc. But then he settled down to have kids and lived in Wayne, New Jersey, and had a regular job. but he always missed the life on the road and the gig life of musician. So anybody like myself who played electric guitar and liked rock and roll and liked to play music, he would like to talk to. So eventually, he knew that I had an interest in that, and he was the administrative assistant, which we all know who work at the school is a thankless job that has much more difficulty than one would ever imagine would be at at a non-professional level job. But nevertheless, he said that he wanted me to help him learn these blues songs by Jorma Kaukonen, a famous blues guitarist, because he couldn't understand the video that Jorma made to teach the songs. So my job was to watch the video with him and explain to him what it said in the video, so he could learn how to play the songs. So I taught him, for a few weeks that way, maybe half a year, and he started calling me Black Dog because he knew of my affinity for Led Zeppelin, which is one of their most famous songs. And he said, and his name was Blind Cantaloupe. So, we'd always greet each other. Hey, Blind Cantaloupe, how's it going there, Black Dog? We'd always have a nice chat, and in the office when I would check in. He was the one who informed me that One Meatball was actually a real song.
Yeah, and Paul helped train me when I first started working at Thurnauer, along with Jackie Hartman training me, and he was always fun-loving, and he worked super hard, and he just did so much for the school in the very, very earliest days of the school. He was registrar and head of the handling facilities and equipment and all customer service and many things. I miss him.
And later he became a sound engineer, and he started to
video engineer. Yeah,
that's right. And he did
so
garage.
Seth,
Well, one last thing about Paul.
Yeah, sure.
He did Garage Theater Group, which my daughter was part of temporarily.
Okay.
So I got to see him a few times at Garage Theater Productions.
Great. So I'm going to share one or two more photos, then I want to make sure we save some time for questions and answers. I know we have some people on here who would love to talk with you. Here's just another photo. This is, I think, more recent. A photo of just a bunch of your guitar students. I mean, in recent years, we've had as many as 30 students on this stage for those year-end concerts, and it's just wonderful every time, and seeing the quality of it each time, and the focus of the students, and the enthusiasm and happiness of the parents. It's just a pleasure. And I'll just show this one more. I think this is not the same one I just showed, is it? This one's a little different. And for those who don't know, guitars come in proportional sizes. So you'll see a small guitar up here versus an adult full size. They go as small as what, 1/16 size in guitar, Seth, or even smaller?
We usually refer to them by their scale length rather than their actual fractional size.
Uh-huh.
So usually it would be like a 40 or 35 centimeter guitar for the littlest kids. Sometimes even a guitar-lele type of guitar.
Okay, and one last area that let's just talk on briefly, and I want to make sure then we switch to our questions. You're a big scholar of the music. You know so much about particular performers and particular repertoire and particular performances and recordings, and do you have a handful of favorites, whether they're living or no longer living, or a handful of recordings that you would recommend to your gathered fans here tonight?
Well, okay.
Some of your favorite musician, guitarists, I mean.
Well, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for John Williams, the elder statesman of the classical guitar, who's probably recorded every single piece, of significant repertoire ever. But I love his recordings of the Albanese, the Spanish guitar music. And I love his recordings of the Bach suites, and you can't go wrong with those. And also his recordings of Barrios. Then I already mentioned one of my favorites, Manuel Barrueco, is a wonderful player. And Sharon Isbin has been a player that I've really loved for a long time. Leo Brouwer wrote wonderful music for her. And another player that I like very much is Jason Vio, whom we mentioned. And I also like, there's so many wonderful players out there. Berto Rojas is an incredible player that we talked about before. I love the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet, probably my favorite guitar ensemble. Let's see. There's just so much to listen for. I still think in terms of CDs, which ages me in a big way. But Barrueco has a set called the Vox Box of his his first 4 record albums turned into CDs, which I guess you can now stream online. So that's wonderful to go for. But there's so many young players out there nowadays, like Elena Papandreou is a marvelous guitarist. Ana Vidovic is an amazing player. There's just so many. It's hard to even think of.
Colin Davin performed at he gave a master class, and Rupert Boyd also. They're
both wonderful players as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. And So that's a lot of recommended listening. And I think you mentioned Leo Brouwer. So
Yes, he was a wonderful composer.
is this who's this
Yes,
gentleman? Oops,
that was at his 80th birthday celebration at Mannes School of Music.
where did
With
he go?
autographs.
Oh, I don't know. Something happened to the photo. Sorry, but
iCloud's storage is full.
you got to meet him, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So one last question, and then we'll switch to Q&A. What are you looking forward to post-pandemic when we are finally able to look back on this period? What do you look forward to?
Well, I'd like to actually go to the JCC and see people and teach a group class of people in the same room together and play a song together where I can actually hear the students and I don't have to have them all muted.
Mm-hmm.
So I just like to sort of return to sort of a semi-normal existence.
Right. That's a good
There
goal.
we go. There's Mr. Brower.
Leo Brown. He's 80 in that picture. He looks great. Looks
80
great.
years old.
So he was a composer and guitarist, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're also a composer, which we didn't talk about. Are you still composing?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So,
Before any questions and answers, I have something that I have to say.
sure, of course.
Which is that I have to recognize my colleague and friend, Jonathan Trotta, who's
Mhm.
been with the school for what must be like 9 or 10 years now. You've been with us. And I'm just so appreciative of his contribution to our program, and his students play amazingly well, and just the whole atmosphere that he creates in the program is just a fantastic thing. So I really appreciate having Jonathan on the Zoom tonight, and I just appreciate Jonathan having you around in the program. It's just great to have you around, and you're an amazing teacher. So thank you for being there.
Thanks, Seth. I'm lucky to be in this program with you and have you as my consigliere for
My pleasure.
So, thank you. That was beautiful. Seth, so we're going to switch now to question and answers. I want to invite everybody to show yourselves, so to speak, with show your videos, and so we can see each other, feel like we're in a room together, perhaps. And if you have a question, you can use the raise hand function. You could put it into the chat, or you can, and then we, can unmute and say something. And then before we do that, we'll say it again at the end, Seth. But this has been really wonderful to spend time with you, and we just feel so lucky to have you as part of our school. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to some questions. I see some parents of students there who have been here for a while. I see.
Karen Shapiro speaking.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
This
Hello.
was wonderful, Seth. It's not really a question. I just wanted to say it was so wonderful to hear you. I was one of those Jewish mothers who came in.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
And Max is always one of my star students, except during baseball season.
right. I was remembering how when we saw you later at a concert and you said how you remembered how he had to cut his nails during baseball.
Well, I get all excited because he was playing this amazing repertoire. It's like, okay, baseball season, boop, there go the nails. Whatever. Wait till the fall.
It was an amazing experience because I, as a musician, had not experienced Suzuki,
Sure.
and I was also in OT school at the time.
Yes, that's right.
And,
Well, you shared a lot of interesting stuff with me about that at the time because I was going through
there were
recovery from an injury.
parallels. There were a lot of parallels, and
No doubt.
so for me it was quite an education as well.
Fantastic.
For Max, I can only say, he developed into quite a musician, and you were such an instrumental, forgive the pun, part of that.
There you go. I forgive the pun. It was a pleasure to teach Max. He was a great, wonderful student to have, and you guys were awesome to have in the program.
He's actually teaching himself piano now.
Fantastic.
And the interesting thing is, the phenomenal thing is, he still does not like to read music.
I see.
But he gives a lot of credit to you for having developed his ear so much.
Well,
Sure.
I give a lot of credit, and then he commits everything to memory immediately.
Sure.
And we're talking Chopin and
Sure.
and
He's
everything.
an example of the type of student that I say, when you get a teenager with a good ear, forget trying to teach them how to read. It's like trying to stop a person in a Ferrari with a bicycle. You got to get them reading before they're a teen. Because when they're a teen with a really good ear, they're just going to say, "Why should I do that reading stuff? I'm just going to figure it out by ear."
Right, and that's how he started on piano, and then,
Sure.
it's amazing how quickly he can put all this into his head.
Sure.
I'm so glad you guys joined us. Come to some concerts, Rick and Karen. Oh, speaking of which, I'd be remiss if I didn't encourage everybody to come to our virtual Gift of Music Gala 2 weeks from, on Sunday, May 2nd at 4 p.m. You can see the details on giftofmusicgala.org. It's our annual fundraiser to help us raise money for our scholarship fund. And this year we have an amazing lineup of artists who have donated their services to us, who are going to both speak and perform, including the great Sharon Isman, Colin Davin, guitarist, Wynton Marsalis, the jazz trumpet player, Joshua Bell, the violinist, Stephen Ischilis, the cellist, Francisco Nunez of the Young People's Chorus of New York City. It's going to be a great lineup, and we would love to have your support. I will put the link into the chat in a minute, but I want to ask now Chris to, I think, has a question, and then I have a surprise, so please don't let me forget the surprise. So Chris, you may have the floor. What would you like to say, Chris? Or
when you were younger, has there ever been a moment in your life where you didn't want to practice guitar?
Yes. There are times when I just get frustrated with it, or just tired, or something like that. You know, but
Oh, in the dryer.
generally, that hasn't been a huge problem. Because I want to practice more than I don't want to practice.
There you go. Good answer. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Seth, it's already been 6 years for Chris, and
Yes.
I can't imagine. I've never imagined what he's been, accomplished so far, and now he's kind of going into. You already know Seth, electrical guitar and piano now. So I've never would have imagined that he would be touching these types of this fields of music, and Carolina and myself were just so happy.
I'm so glad.
To actually start from guitar and just kind of, Chris is just spreading out to other fields, and he's still sticking to definitely the guitar, definitely. But we're just so happy to hear more music in the house, not just from music like from the stereo or YouTube, but actually from our child, and it's just an amazing thing. So thank you, Seth.
That's
My
beautiful.
pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Chris was the opening act in a performance of two very famous guitarists in New York City.
Yes, I do remember that. Yes.
Oh yeah.
That was with him. Yeah.
Yeah, Eduardo Fernandez and David Leisner. Chris was the opening performer for them.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
Very, very scary for him, but he pulled through very well.
He was terrific. Before we have the next question, I don't want to forget, and I don't want anybody to miss this. So I'm going to share a little surprise with you all. So here it comes. Just a second. Let me make sure I'm sharing sound. Okay, here we go.
Aww.
Awesome.
Hi, Seth. You're the best.
Thank you, Ron. Yay!
Thank you, Seth.
You're welcome, Charles.
Hi, Seth. I just wanted to thank you for all of your help over the years.
Thank you, Kieran.
Hi, Seth. Greetings from Colombia.
Greetings from Colombia.
I
There
just
you
wanted to say
go.
that you mean the world to me and that I appreciate you teaching me so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Zia.
There you go. That was a surprise.
That's a wonderful surprise. I'm so excited. That's fantastic. I love it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, huge round of applause for everybody who were part of that.
So we have some more, a question or two. Let's see. Next question. Here we go. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, hi. This is Amod, and hi Seth, thank you very much for being the teacher. He has a renewed interest in guitar. He loves playing it every day, and because of him, I'm also enjoying. And I hear you speak about teachers, parents getting interested. You want to say something? I love it.
I play every day at break time in school.
Nice.
I practice these 3 things.
Nice work. Well, you're doing a great job, Amode. It's really fun teaching you.
Thank you.
That's sweet. Okay, the moment I've been waiting for. Sam Listener would like to say something. Hold on. Sam was a student in the school many years ago when I first started teaching. Hi, Sam.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I can attest to that there at one time there was no music school wing. I remember taking lessons with you, Seth, in the
Sure.
I mean all over the building. But
Absolutely.
I think I don't know. Maybe there were. I mean, I remember Amanda Kaplan as sort of in my cohort, but I don't know if there were very many other guitar students at that time. But
You and Nanda were definitely the prominent ones at that in that era.
well, I've got many memories I could share, but 2 questions because now I'm the parent of two young kids. And
Sure.
the first question to you is, at what age do you think it's appropriate to and I imagine it must be kind of child dependent, but what age would you sort of suggest that we start to seriously consider guitar lessons?
Okay.
And the second question is, at a certain point, I think one of your students was just talking about this, Suzuki is a wonderful introduction and classical is a wonderful introduction. And many people just stick with it, but others kind of get interested in other kinds of music. And so
Sure.
at what point do you feel comfortable nourishing that in your students, that sort of that divergence from the program?
Sure.
And
Sure.
Your thoughts on both those questions.
Sure. Okay. Great questions. And the first one, I would say probably around 4 years old. But then you had to be ready. When you say, "Is my 4-year-old ready to play music?" Probably, but are you ready for it? Because you're going to work much harder than they are. If you want to work less hard, start them when they're 6, right? But you'll still be working hard. But 4 years old is a wonderful age to start because you kind of get them when they're a little bit more fresh and more guidable in certain directions. So 4 years old is a wonderful age to be thinking about that. And then in terms of like branching out from the Suzuki method or from classical guitar, I generally try to get them into book 2 before I really start dealing with that. Mainly because classical guitar tends to focus mostly on melodic notes in the beginning and then goes to chords later. The opposite of a lot of folk style, which starts with chords. But because of our focus on tone production, it's kind of hard to make chords at first. Because we can't make the sound that we want. Making a G chord or something for a beginner, it's not that easy. So at the same time, book 2 is actually getting them into chords. So that's the time. In book 3, it's really kind of open season.
Wonderful. Well, I also want to commend Michael for doing an incredible interviewing job here. Michael, I think you could take this show on the road if you wanted to. So
Absolutely.
well done, and thank you, Seth, for everything. You mean a lot to me and so many others. So
Thank you, Tim. It was great teaching you, and it's wonderful to see you growing up into such a nice person and a dad and everything. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll second that. I remember Sam and Amanda very clearly in my earliest days at the school, and they've both grown up into fine young people. And thank you so much for being here tonight, Sam. I know Amanda sends her regrets. She was aware of this and hoped to be able to make it, but wasn't able to.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have a question from Roland Davis. If you can unmute yourself, Roland. 1 second. Okay, there you go.
Hi, Roland.
Hey, Seth. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Great talk tonight. Doing good. Sorry, my kids, sorry, Zach and Luke couldn't make it. They're up at boarding school and they wanted to be part of that Twinkle thing, but they don't have their guitars with them.
Okay. Well, that's the way it goes sometimes.
I actually just wanted to follow up. In some ways, I wanted to follow up on Sam's question. I've always wondered if the Suzuki Association has any plans to expand out the repertoire in the books. There's so much great jazz, folk, blues repertoire that I think teaches an incredible amount about finger picking and
I'd say the short answer is no.
no plans to switch the books or expand out the repertoire.
No, because the idea is that that's something that we are seeing each teacher do in an individual way. And there isn't enough agreement on any one way to do it that I think you could get. It's hard enough to get people to agree on how to finger lightly row. To try to get them to agree on what kind of chord progression to teach the kids later on, it's just going to be a nightmare. So it's definitely better to just have teachers do it on their own way, because teachers have to do it based on a style that they personally understand, that they can relate to, that they can, pass on in a proper oral tradition to the kids. So I think that it's something that has to come from individual teachers.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say was I was looking at those pictures of the parents' concert.
Yes.
And, thinking back to my first, to my only parent concert where I got out on stage after I had gone through your 8-week training program, and how incredibly nervous I was to play Twinkle.
See, there you go. Right.
And I don't know what else we did, Lightly Row or Song of the Wind if we were
Something
lucky.
like that, yeah.
But how unbelievably nervous I was. And then I kept up with my kids, and, by the end was playing book 5 with my kids. And it was just,
Sure.
I really salute you in how much of an emphasis you put on parent education as well, and parent participation. It really, it made, an extraordinary difference in my kids' life, but also in my own life. Just a few months ago, I picked up the guitar and learned, that complicated 4 and 20 song by Crosby, Stills, Nash.
Oh, sure, yeah.
With the alternate tunings, and was like, hey, I think I'll learn Boots of Spanish Leather by Bob Dylan, and all of these are rich, intricate finger-picking songs, and I just have such an incredible love for the classical guitar repertoire thanks to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roland.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I think, Roland, you touch on something that is really a beautiful thing about music in general, and something I know that we value very much at Thurnauer, which is musical friendships. The people-to-people relationship. And here is a picture of your 2 boys and their guitars in the front row that I happen to have handy. Can you guys see this picture?
Love that picture. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's a sweet photo, but there's
a couple of scalawags.
There is something about the guitarists at the school. They have personalities and they have a sense of community, and it's a great thing. Just want to check one last time if there's any more questions, because we're gonna just wrap up here in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to give the final word to Dorothy Rothman, the founding director of the school. Excuse me. Seth, I just want to say what a real pleasure it's been to spend this time with you tonight, but more importantly, to know you through the school as a teacher, as a friend, as a musician, and to learn from you as we all did tonight, I think. And so I'm excited to see you in person sometime soon, and I want to encourage everyone listening to, if you know anybody who wants to play classical guitar, send them our way. We have a terrific program, and we'd be excited to talk with anybody who might want to study classical guitar with us. So I'm going to hand it to Dorothy for the final words.
Well, Seth, it's just been absolutely wonderful to spend this hour and a half with you. I can't believe it. It's been so long. You were single, living in New York, and we went through your marriage, your children. They've graduated now. It's been a lifetime that we have spent together.
Yep, it's been fantastic.
And building the school together. You've done such an incredible job in developing a love for classical guitar and creating a program that is so impactful at our school. And
Dorothy.
Well, I've loved working together with you, and my very first instincts about who you were on the telephone were absolutely right.
Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate that.
And it's wonderful, Michael, to have these talks, and it's such a feeling of community, and to see people we haven't seen for a while, and to discover all the good things that are happening to people in spite of all the difficulties of the past year. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Michael, for making this happen. Thank you, Seth, for being Seth.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you guys for everything.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Dorothy.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.